My name's QuickPick Nick, and having simulated millions of lineups, here's your locks and lotteries on FanDuel and DraftKings for Week 5 of the 2021 NFL season this Sunday, October 10th. I'll be showing two of my top-ranked simulated lineups at the end of the video for both FanDuel and DraftKings, and throughout the video, there will be two player designations. Locks refer to players with high confidence intervals in my simulations, and lotteries are found in relatively less top-ranked simulations, but are still valuable picks expected to exceed their price point projections. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any full slate videos or single-game lineups throughout the week. Getting right into the picks, there are a couple of quarterback recommendations I can make based on my model. The first lock I have is one of the early breakout players of this season, that being Sam Darnold. After scoring around 20 fantasy points in both weeks 1 and 2, Darnold scored 2 rushing touchdowns in each of weeks 3 and 4, making him the leading rushing touchdown scorer across the NFL, which is rather shocking from a player of Darnold's unkingly and unremarkable physique. Philadelphia currently ranks last in the NFL with respect to allowed rushing yards, letting up over 150 yards per game to opponents, positioning Darnold to potentially make a push to retain his title through Week 5. While Darnold's kind of cost-effective, ranking 7th on both FanDuel and DraftKings in pricing, another cheap lottery is Derek Carr, costing $6,100 on DraftKings and $7,100 on FanDuel. Carr faced a brick wall defense in LA last week against the Chargers, whose defense ranks 5th in allowed passing yards, so his dip in performance isn't unexpected. Aside from that low point, Carr has exceeded 22 fantasy points in the other 3 contests this season, and Chicago's middle-of-the-road defense is a great opportunity for a bounce back. Before starting the running back section, I wanted to preface things by saying that for this slate, at this position, there are no locks. Running backs all around have been very injury-prone throughout the season, and seeing split backfields across the NFL makes it difficult to guarantee a good performance from almost any player at the position. Almost any player, that is, aside from our first lottery, Derrick Henry, who is a lottery only because of his massive price tag across both platforms, especially so for FanDuel. Excluding Week 1, when Tennessee faced the still undefeated Cardinals, Henry has scored around 33 fantasy points per game in weeks 2 through 4. Facing the still completely defeated Jaguars, Henry will likely be able to plow his way through Jacksonville's 26th ranked defense and allowed fantasy points to running backs. All things considered, I'd maybe go as far to consider Henry a lock on DraftKings since he's only $400 more expensive than next best option Alvin Kamara over there, but it's still a massive price to pay, which is why he'll remain a lottery. For the next couple of lotteries, I'd consider either of Cleveland's running backs a viable option today. I mentioned earlier that the Chargers have been problematic for passing teams, but in the run game, the Chargers have allowed the 4th most rushing yards per game to opponents, making way for the Browns' 2 workhorses to find their time in the limelight once again. On FanDuel, Nick Chubb is only $500 more expensive than Kareem Hunt, which is an upgrade that seems to be well worth the cost. But on DraftKings, that upgrade costs $900 on a platform where each dollar is more valuable, so it's safe to say that if you're looking to Cleveland for running backs this week, Chubb seems to be the play on FanDuel, whereas Hunt is more valuable on DraftKings. One more lottery to consider at running back is Ezekiel Elliott, who seems like he's been dining exclusively at all-you-can-eat buffets recently with the amount the Cowboys have been letting him eat. Excluding Week 1, Zeke has averaged around 21 fantasy points per game, and the Giants' 28th ranked defense and allowed fantasy points to running backs doesn't seem like a defense to even slow Zeke down this week. Moving to wide receiver now, our first block at the position is going to be Jamar Chase, especially for any DraftKings lineup. Chase will face a Green Bay defense that has been pretty secure this season, but one that struggles in allowing passing touchdowns, ranking in the bottom 5 in allowed passing touchdowns this season. With an average of a touchdown per game, I definitely expect Chase to add at least another 6 points to his young resume at home this week. Chase is relatively cheap too, ranking 10th on FanDuel and ridiculously low at 23rd on DraftKings. So if you're playing on DraftKings, there's no reason to skip out on a front-runner Rookie of the Year candidate. One player I'm somewhat hesitant to lock in is Deebo Samuel, who has been one of the most explosive receivers this season. Samuel has scored above 27 FanDuel fantasy points and 35 DraftKings fantasy points in 2 of his 4 games this season, with his other 2 games averaging out to a mediocre baseline around 10 fantasy points. The reason for my hesitancy here is that Arizona's defense might be troubling for either San Francisco quarterback, as the Cardinals have allowed the 11th least passing yards to opponents this season. Plus, Samuel's pretty expensive, ranking 5th on FanDuel's price list and 7th on DraftKings, but the possibility of a 30-plus fantasy point game is justification enough to take the Niners' clear top threat. For the rest of these receivers, since there are so many viable lotteries, I'll sort of go through them at rapid fire, and wanted to make note here that I'd consider any of these guys worthwhile to put in a wide receiver slot or switch in at flex. If for whatever reason you're not completely sold on Jamar Chase, then T. Higgins returning from a 2-week injury and Tyler Boyd are both valid replacements since they will probably also benefit from Green Bay's likelihood to allow a few passing touchdowns. Terry McLaurin has continued to grow his synergy with Taylor Heineke, scoring around 30 fantasy points in Week 4 and facing the Saints' 26th ranked defense and allowed receiving yards. Adam Thielen has become much cheaper than Justin Jefferson this week, even though they are getting similar targets, so taking Thielen against the frontrunner to be the worst team in the NFL sounds like a good idea. Any Tampa Bay receiver also seems like a good idea, especially with Gronkowski sidelined for at least the next few games and facing a middling Miami defense. defense. On FanDuel, Mike Evans costs 600 less than Chris Godwin, while on DraftKings, Godwin costs 500 less than Evans, so it might be worth just taking the cheaper of the two on either platform. Or just go with Antonio Brown, who is significantly cheaper on both FanDuel and DraftKings and had 11 targets last week against his former home for a week of New England. Another good team to target for receivers is Tampa's opponent of the Dolphins, since the Buccaneers typically like to run up the score with their defense allowing the most passing yards per game. The only reason Devontae Parker and Jalen Waddle aren't locks is because they'll have Jacoby Brissett under center, but they're still in good position to put up points. Now that we're through with the receivers, the best tight end in this slate is clearly our lock, Dalton Schultz. And while that might sound like a bold claim, which it is, Schultz has had massive back-to-back weeks with 3 touchdowns and around 40 fantasy points combined across that span. He'll face the Giants' 20th ranked defense and allowed receiving yards, and the best part about all of this is that he's cheap on FanDuel, costing $6,200, and dirt cheap on DraftKings at only $4,400, so make sure to definitely add Schultz on DraftKings. If for some reason I couldn't sell you on Schultz, Mike Gesicki is another really good lock-worthy tight end with that easy Tampa Bay matchup and a clear dependency upon him from Brissett. For flex, you've already got plenty of picks from all the running backs and receivers, and for the defense, my model typically goes as cheap as possible without picking a blowout. On FanDuel, a few good picks are the Texans, Eagles, and Chargers, while on DraftKings, the Eagles and Texans are again viable with the Washington football team entering our affordable range. With that all being said, here are a couple of my top-ranked simulated lineups on both FanDuel and DraftKings. The FanDuel lineup took all of our budget, whereas the DraftKings one has a couple hundred left for you to throw at some new defense or a slight upgrade somewhere else. Here's to hoping our hot streak continues, so subscribe to the channel as we continue to absolutely bankroll FanDuel and DraftKings for the rest of the season. Thanks for watching.